although you all have experience, is that you find that sometimes you sit and for some reason you cannot focus your mind. It happens to all of us, myself included. And of course this is good not only for beginners, but anyone who's having too much mental activity, worrying, obsessing, regretting, and so on. So this is really good. And it's good to know also because if you know someone, a friend, a family member, co-worker, who's having too much, mental activity, worrying and so on, you can share that with them. It's very easy. And you place your palms on your knees, and you're aware of that touch. Be aware of your palms touching the knees. And you start with the right palm, and you lift mindfully on the edge like this. Okay, can you see from there? Yeah. Then lifting slowly to the stomach. Feel the touch in the stomach area. Left palm up. Lifting slowly to the stomach. Be aware of your hand touching the other hand. And just keep your hands very loose, very relaxed, not tight. Then right hand up to the chest, the right hand. Feel the touch. Out, down. Feel the touch on the knee. Then palm down. Left hand up, touching the chest. Out, down, and down. Again, right palm up to the stomach, touching left stomach. Be aware of the touch. Right hand up, touching, out, down, and down. Left. Right. Left. Right, left, right, left, And as we do this, just be aware of any thoughts which arise, just like when you're doing mindful breathing, and you come back to the hand movements and the hand touching the body. So in this way, you can let go of useless thinking. This is how we train the mind. Focusing, observing, letting go. You begin to feel the rhythm of the movements. And the mind becomes more calm, more relaxed, and just being aware of the present moment. Okay, so we can just go to mindful breathing. Breathing in, I know I am breathing in. Breathing out, I know I am breathing out. Now we can do the loving kindness meditation, otherwise known as Metta Bhavana. May I be well, peaceful, and happy. May my family be well, peaceful, and happy. May my friends be well, peaceful, and happy. May my co-workers be well, peaceful, and happy. May my teachers be well, peaceful, and happy. May my neighbors be well, peaceful, and happy. May all beings be well, peaceful, and happy. May I be well, peaceful, and happy. May all beings be well, peaceful, and happy. I hope you're feeling more relaxed. As you know, after a very busy day, it really is a blessing when we can sit together and just share something which is so sacred, so special. Because as you know, when we're very busy, very preoccupied, the present moment has very little meaning. Because it's all about schedule, planning, achieving, becoming, the future, the past. And of course, we cannot appreciate silence when we're busy, preoccupied. But when the mind becomes more relaxed, more silent, more still, then we realize the sacredness of silence. Now this evening we'll be exploring, investigating the Anattalakhanna Sutta, which is very profound, very fascinating, very challenging. And very often it's very difficult to really understand. So when the Buddha began to teach this teaching of anatta, non-self, emptiness, it was such a radical, so different, so profound, that most people couldn't understand it. Because as you know, when we're caught in conditioning, the conditioned mind, which is thinking, and the I, and there's no awareness, no silence, the I seems very permanent. It seems very concrete, fixed, and it feels somehow separate from the world, from nature, from society, and somehow it feels independent. But of course it's an illusion, because nothing and no one exists as a separate, independent entity. No one and nothing. And so you can imagine for thousands and thousands of years, people were caught in this conditioning of thinking, identifying totally with the thought process, and clinging very strongly to this I, the sense of self. So naturally, from that clinging, that attachment without insight or understanding, came the belief in reincarnation. That when the body dies, which it must, the solid, permanent, seemingly separate and independent self will continue after death. It will be reborn in a new body. It's a very ancient belief. And all the ancient civilizations believe this, including Chinese, ancient Egyptian civilization, Middle East, Mesopotamia, and of course the Hindu culture believe this. And they still believe this. And as you know, in Tibetan Buddhism, the belief in reincarnation is very important in Tibetan Buddhism. And they got it from the Hindus. And they believe in teachers reincarnating. And of course, the highest reincarnation is that of the Dalai Lama. They believe he's the reincarnation of the Bodhisattva of compassion, Chenrezig or Kuan Yin. And in Pali it's Avalokiteshvara. So when the Buddha had this insight, very profound insight, and he began to say that this I, this seemingly permanent, solid, separate, independent I, that it was not permanent, that it was just a conditioning in the mind. People were just completely puzzled, baffled. And I'm sure some people got very upset with the Buddha. It's like being in a community of fundamentalist Christian who strongly believe in God, a creator God, and saying to them, God does not exist. It's just a belief in your mind. Or it's just a symbol of nature, which I've come to understand, being a former Christian. After much investigation, I've come to realize God is just a symbol of nature. And nature, when we really investigate, we begin to see that it's very, very complex. It's a complex web, intricate web of interrelationships, interconnectedness. And of course, the Buddha taught this. Interconnectedness, interdependency. So the idea of an independent, separate I is completely an illusion in the mind, but it's a very strong illusion. So because it was so radical, so profound, so challenging, so difficult for people to understand, even monks, he tried to teach this in different ways to make it more simple. And one way was to see through mindfulness, direct awareness, that who we really are is not this I, but rather this process of body and mind, physical and mental phenomena, otherwise known as rupa and nama in the Pali language. Now, initially when we hear that we are this process of body and mind, it sounds logical, but it's still just an idea, a concept. We don't really see it deeply. But of course, when we are on a retreat, we're very mindful, very present, we can see it more and more clearly in everything that we do. There's body and mind. And of course, we are alive because we are a process. This process of body and mind. If we were not alive, if we were not a process, we wouldn't be alive. And this process is very, very complex. Just like, as I mentioned before, even the process of digestion is very, very complex. But fortunately, we don't have to worry about it. We just eat and we carry on, or we go to sleep. But it's amazing how the body has this intelligence to deal with this very, very complex process. Now, when we're very mindful, we can see this very directly. For example, when we're mindful of the breath, the physical sensation of the breath, that is the body, Rupa, and the awareness of that physical sensation is mind. The physical sensation of the breath is the body, Rupa, and the awareness of that physical sensation is mind, Nama. It's Rupa and Nama, body and mind. Initially, it's easier to see this when we're doing more dynamic mindfulness. For example, when we're doing mindful walking, the feet moving and stepping, that's the body, the physical, Rupa, and the awareness of the feet moving and stepping is mind, Nama. There's Rupa and Nama, body and mind. And say when we're doing this dynamic meditation, the hands moving and touching, that is Rupa, the physical, and the awareness of the moving, the movement and the touching is mind, mental, Nama, only body and mind. No I, no self. Only physical and mental phenomena. Body and mind process. And this reflection helps us to go beyond all our social labels, including man, woman, father, mother, monk, layperson, lawyer, doctor, engineer, dentist, IT specialist, president, prime minister, queen, king, prince, princess, and so on. Only body and mind. And as body and mind, Rupa and Nama, this process is subject to constant change. It is subject to illness. It's subject to hunger, tiredness, aging, and death. So whether you're prime minister, president, royalty, it's the same. It's the same process. And we mentioned before that we often overlook this fact that we're a process, simply because we live in the human world, human convention. We use language. We use currency. As you know, dogs and cats and birds have absolutely no use for currency, or smartphones or credit cards. But human beings, we have created this. Just like we have created language. And so we have labels to communicate. I, you, he, she. And we have names. Our parents gave us names because it is our social convention. But names are just social labels for this process of body and mind. But when we are aware in the present moment, then we are in touch with this reality of body and mind, physical and mental phenomena. And because it's a process, we need to recharge this process quite regularly. The same way you recharge your handphones. And if we stop recharging this process of who we are, then we naturally get weaker and weaker and weaker, and we pass away. And as you know, throughout human history, many humans were not able to recharge this process due to lack of food and so on. And they simply starved. They died of starvation. But fortunately, we don't have to worry about that. Now, the Buddha went a bit further, a bit deeper, and he said this body-mind process has 5 factors that create our daily experience. Sometimes we use the word aggregate or sekandhas in Pali, 5 things. The physical form, feeling or sensation, perception, mental formation or mental reaction, and consciousness. Now, when we first hear or read about these 5 things, somehow they seem a bit complicated. And we don't see how these 5 things are related to our daily experience. So this is why I like to give a simple example of these 5 factors working. Then we can relate to them in our daily experience. Now, before I give you that simple example, I would like to clarify what perception is, because many people are not really sure exactly what is perception, although we use that word sometimes. We say, it depends on how we perceive things, right? So and so and so and so. Perception, to be more accurate, is not only the ability to sense something, through seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and thinking, but it's the ability to recognize a sense object. For example, you recognize this as a cup, or this as a microphone. How do you recognize it as a cup or a microphone? That's like you're listening to the radio, that's a good example. Say you recognize a song, and sometimes you recognize the singer, the artist. That's perception. If you don't recognize the song or the singer, you just don't recognize it. But if you do recognize it, that's perception at work. In other words, perception is related to memory and past experience. And I like to give the example of, say, you're in Chinatown, say in North America. You know, we have a few large Chinatowns in North America. Vancouver, San Francisco, Toronto, New York. And many white Americans and white Canadians will go to Chinatown and they see all these fruits from Southeast Asia. They see rambutan, they see durian, they see mangosteen, mangis. And they have no idea what these fruits are, because they've never experienced it before. Whereas if you and I go to these Chinatowns and you see these fruits, automatically you know what they are. And if you travel the world and you happen to smell durian, you know exactly what that smell is, no doubt. And another good example of the power of perception, and I'm sure you've had this experience, say you're meeting a friend somewhere downtown, you know, in say a shopping center, very busy shopping center. And you're waiting for your friend, and of course you see many faces coming and going, coming and going. And of course your friend is a little late. But the moment you see your friend's face, among all those faces coming and going, you know exactly, my friend is here. The power of perception. Also, consciousness is something that is constantly changing. Because sometimes we think that consciousness is something fixed in the mind, some permanent entity in the mind. But actually, consciousness is constantly changing according to our sense experiences. For example, say if you had dinner or you had a snack before you came here, part of consciousness would include tasting and smelling. All right? Now, at this moment, there is no tasting or smelling. So what do we have in consciousness at this moment? There's seeing, hearing, and feeling. You can feel your body sitting on the floor or on the chair. Okay? Now close your eyes for a moment. There is no seeing consciousness, but there's hearing and feeling. And if you're thinking something, that will be a part of consciousness, thinking consciousness. Now open your eyes, and seeing consciousness arises again. That's the nature of consciousness. It's constantly changing. And so later when you go home and you have something to eat, tasting and maybe smelling will arise again. And what is very interesting is that tonight when we all go to bed and we fall asleep, there is no consciousness in that deep sleep state. And it's usually between 1 to 2 hours, depending on the individual. No consciousness, no thinking, and no I. So every night we actually die, mentally, psychologically, for at least 1 to 2 hours. Very interesting. So we should never be afraid of death. Otherwise we'll never go to sleep. We'll stay up all night drinking, you know, coffee, tea. Very interesting, the nature of consciousness. And this is why there's an old saying, when somebody's in deep sleep and not aware of anything, we say that person is dead to the world. That's an old saying. Someone is dead to the world. And in a way, they're right. Physically, they might be alive, but mentally, psychologically, there's no consciousness, no awareness of anything. So in that deep sleep state, Singapore does not exist. That's right. And when I was in the United States a few months ago, I was telling people there that in deep sleep state, Donald Trump does not exist. Which can be a very comforting idea. But of course, if we're still alive, or the body is still alive, when the mind, the brain comes out of that deep sleep state, then the thought process starts up again. And that's what we call the dream state. In case you're wondering, what happened to dreams? And if you observe your dreams and you write them down quickly before you forget them, you'll see that most of our dreams are just memories all mixed up. Because thinking is related to memory, past experience, knowledge, information. All the knowledge, information that we have is related to thinking. And sometimes we have fantasies, certain fantasies. And sometimes, if we're having a conflict in our daily life at that moment, very often it will come out in our dreams. Or some anxiety, anxious dream. And I'm sure you've noticed that if you have some important appointment or some important event that's coming up, very often we dream about it. Or say if you're taking a trip somewhere, and naturally you're excited about it, very often you'll dream about it. And sometimes you dream that you get to the airport, you're all excited, but you missed your flight. And you wake up and you say, oh, thank goodness, it's only a dream, right? Now, sometime in your dream, you're in serious trouble, right? But then you wake up, thank goodness, it's only a dream. Very interesting, the nature of consciousness. And eventually, when we wake up, you see that, and the world begins again. Singapore comes into being. So it's really consciousness that creates the world, that creates Singapore, your life in Singapore. Now, I'll give you that simple example. Say you're taking a walk in the park. Say here is a botanical gardens, right? Of course, your physical form is involved with the sense organs. You hear a sound. You look towards the sound, and your eyes see something, an image. With perception, you recognize that image as, say, a frog or a snake. From that recognition comes feeling or sensation. If you happen to like frogs and snakes, what kind of feeling, sensation will you experience? Pleasant, right? You're happy to see the frog or the snake. On the other hand, if you don't like frogs or snakes, the opposite. Aversion, fear, anxiety. So from that feeling sensation comes mental reaction. If it's a pleasant experience, you might say, wow, let me stop and watch the frog, hopping or snaking. You had neutral. Mm. Mm-hmm. But I'm sure you were very awake, right? Mm. I think what you did was very good. Mm. Because once in Sri Lanka, I had a very close encounter right there with a cobra. That's right. Mm. Well, I became very, very awake. I've never been so awake in my life. Yeah, that's right. All your nerve endings, right, are completely alert. Completely alert. This is the most dramatic lesson in letting go. It doesn't matter how much suffering nonsense is in your mind, zoom, it's gone. Instant letting go. So cobra snakes can be very good teachers if they don't bite us. Yeah. And you might, part of your mental reaction might be, let me play with them. But if you don't want to touch them, you might take a little twig, and just gently play with the frog or the snake. Because there's no fear, no aversion, no anxiety. On the other hand, if there's fear, anxiety, aversion, then you may quickly decide to walk away. And in some cases, you run. If you're really scared, you run. So that's a simple example of these 5 aggregates working. First, you hear something, there's hearing consciousness. You see, there's perception, there's recognition. From that comes the feeling, sensation. And whether it's pleasant or unpleasant, we react. There's a mental reaction. And what the Dharma is telling us is that these 5 things, they happen very quickly, they're impermanent, and there's no permanent I, no permanent self involved in these 5 things working. And very importantly, these 5 things are interconnected, interdependent. They work together. And one very common mistake is when people say consciousness continues after death. Consciousness continues after death. Because if you understand these 5 aggregates, these 5 factors of experience, you realize you cannot separate consciousness from the other 4 aggregates. Because they're interdependent, interconnected. It's like you cannot separate your nose from your face. Unless you do it surgically. But you cannot separate your nose from your face. Just like your eyebrows, your eyes, your chin, your mouth, etc. It's all a part of the face. So the question is, why do we do this? Why do we say that consciousness continues after death? Or consciousness takes rebirth? There are 2 reasons. One is that we're trapped in thinking. And of course we're attached to the I, which is part of thinking. And of course, wishful thinking. We want to continue somehow. That is the main reason. Wishful thinking. We want to believe somehow, in an afterlife. And the second reason is that thinking itself is limited. It can only see things in isolation and in fragments. Thinking cannot see the whole. I wonder if you see that. Thinking can see things in isolation, in fragments. It cannot really see the whole. Whereas when we calm and focus the mind with this awareness, then we can see the whole. How things are interconnected, interdependent. Of course, if you cannot see this, then you would like to believe that there's an afterlife. And that's fine. You know, if you wish to believe in an afterlife, go ahead. It's your freedom. And this is why humans, over thousands and thousands of years, have created so many different beliefs in an afterlife. Fascinating. Because, as you know, death is the great unknown, is the great mystery. Where do we go? Or when you see a dead body of somebody you know, what has happened to the person? Where's their energy? It's a great mystery. And this is one of the reasons why humans believe in invisible beings, you know, in a spirit or in a ghost. We say that person continues as a ghost or a spirit, an invisible being. Very ancient belief. It's not only the Chinese. And the belief in reincarnation or rebirth is only one belief. There are many, many. For example, the North American Red Indians, they like to believe that after death they will go to the great hunting ground in the sky. Because for them, hunting the buffalo was one of their favorite pastimes. And of course, a way of survival. So if you like McDonald's, you can think, you know, I'll go to the great McDonald's in the sky. Whatever food you like. Or Pizza Hut. Whatever. It's like sometimes we like to believe, these days because of internet, you'd like to believe that heaven is a place where you have, you know, high-speed internet 24/7 and it's absolutely free. You don't have to pay a cent. It's like if you play golf. Golf is one of those games, if you like it, it's an addiction. I was once speaking to a friend who was crazy about golf. And he would travel all over the place playing golf. And he said to me, my idea of heaven is free membership to a golf club, 24/7 also. No problem, no problem. It's the mind projecting, projecting. But it is easy to understand, or easier to understand, why our minds have this fear of the unknown. There's a reason. Just like there's a reason why there is impermanence, why things change. And the main reason I just mentioned before, because we're a process, we're a process of body and mind. So this is why that everything we experience whether it's mental, physical, or emotionally, it's constantly changing because we're this process. And of course, things outside of ourselves also constantly changing. Now, to understand this unknown, you have to understand what thinking is. And we mentioned before, thinking is a response to three things in the mind: memory, past experience, and knowledge. Memory, past experience, and knowledge. And you can add the word information to that. Knowledge, information, memory, past experience. And when you observe your mind, you can see that. It's very simple. Memory, that's obvious, isn't it? Past experience, of course, knowledge, information. And that includes the languages, the languages that we speak. And thinking has that ability to project in the future. You can see that in your minds. All our minds do this. So thinking is a movement in time, from past to future, past to future. And it doesn't matter what language we think in, it's the same thought process. Whether it's Hokkien, Cantonese, Mandarin, Japanese, French, Russian, it's the same thought process. Past to future, past to future. And the conditioning of the I, the self, is part of that movement. Because who we are as a self is related to the past, right? Memories, personal history, and so on. And with that, we have future plans, future goals, right? You can see that. And you can really see this fact more clearly when you meet someone for the first time. And you naturally speak about yourselves. And when you speak about yourselves, what do we speak about? All personal history, isn't it? All our personal history, from childhood. Family, elementary school, high school, college, and so on. All the books you have read, all the movies you have seen, television. Now we have internet. And if you're in the working world, you speak about your work history. And if you have travel experience, you speak about travel experience. In other words, who we are as a conditioned self is really a collection of memories. And with that, of course, we have future projections. Plans, hopes and dreams, goals, and so on. So this is the conditioning that we all have, based on thinking. And we're conditioned with this idea of time because of thinking, the thought process. Whereas when we experience the silence, the stillness, in meditation, we experience timelessness. What we call the eternal now, the eternal present. And this is why it is so beneficial, in our busy lives, just to sit and just to be still, even for half an hour, just to be still, just the state of just being. No becoming, no doing, no action, no achieving, no buying, no possessing, no regretting. Just being, the state of being. This is actually the awakened state of just being. not trying to become enlightened, not trying to become bodhisattva or an arahant, not trying to achieve first jhana or second jhana or 10th jhana, but just being, state of being. That's why there's a very wonderful Zen saying. It says, sitting quietly, doing nothing. Spring comes and the grass grows by itself. And in Southeast Asia, it's sitting quietly, doing nothing. The rain comes and the durian ripens by itself. See? No effort. No effort. Let things happen. So, our thinking consciousness, which is based on that which we know, memory, past experience, knowledge, information, comes upon the great unknown, the mystery of death. And it cannot relate. Thinking which is based on that which we know cannot relate to the unknown. It's like a fish trying to relate to the experience of riding a bicycle. A fish cannot relate to that experience. Or driving a car. Or using internet. A fish cannot relate to these experiences. Likewise, our thinking consciousness cannot relate to the unknown, this great mystery. So naturally, there's fear. Fear of the unknown. And so what thinking does, as the I, very interesting. Thinking says, of course, I will continue after death. Thinking projects itself beyond death. I'll continue somehow. Whether I'll reincarnate, I'll take rebirth, or I'll go to heaven, I'll have eternal life and sit at the right hand of God, or to be with Jesus, all these beliefs. In Sri Lanka, they like to say, may he or she attain Nibbana. Very nice thought. But for them, Nibbana is a concept of heaven. It's just a concept, but it's a nice idea. May he or she attain Nibbana. And because it's a concept, they think Nibbana is a permanent state. Like Christians would like to believe that heaven is a permanent state. So that's what thinking does. And I mentioned the classic example of this is the traditional Chinese belief. A traditional Chinese man is very keen to have sons, grandsons, great-grandsons, and so on. And the main reason, because he believes that as long as the family name continues, right? Sons, grandsons, great-grandsons, I will continue somehow. Do you see that? That's right. Very comforting idea. It's an illusion, of course, and it's craving too, craving. Where the daughters are not so important because they don't carry the family name. But the sons do. Very interesting. And of course, if you're if you're involved with Pure Land Buddhism, I'll be reborn, reborn in the Pure Land. It's a very nice idea. So many different beliefs. Just like the old Hollywood stars, I've seen interviews of them, the stars that I grew up with. And they often say, I will live forever in my movies or in my TV show. And in a way, they're right. Although they won't be around, but as long as we can see their movies, their TV shows, or we can read somebody's book, they exist somehow. Now, what is very interesting is that when we look at all these different beliefs, we begin to see that it is thinking itself. This movement in time from past to future is afraid to come to an end. Because it's a very powerful movement. It's afraid to come to an end, as the I. Hence, all these beliefs in an afterlife. And what is very insightful and very liberating is when we realize that in the stillness, the silence of meditation, when we allow thinking, the thought process, to come to an end, in that very silence is the unknown. That silence, that stillness of the mind is the unknown. That is the absence of thought, which is the known. The absence of thought, thinking, is the unknown. And when we understand this and we experience this in meditation, there is no longer the fear of the unknown. Because we experience it directly as something which is very peaceful and timeless. It's timeless. And that's why it feels so wonderful when the mind is silent. Because in our daily life, we are governed by time, aren't we? And time is a factor of fear, anxiety, and stress. Because stress is time-related. That silence of meditation is the unknown. And so there's no fear of the unknown. We experience it directly. And so that question, that age-old question, does not arise. What happens to me when I die, and where do I go after death? Now, the other teaching, the other reflection that the Buddha taught about this profound reality of non-self, emptiness, was the reflection of the body and the elements. It's very wonderful, very profound. Because as you know, when we first read or hear about the elements, they're just a concept. They're just a concept. Maybe water we can relate to. Because as you know, it's about 70%. And of course, we're drinking all the time. But most of the time, it's just a concept. But when we spend the time to focus on different parts of the body, see which elements are related, then the truth of the elements becomes more clear. Something more intimate, real. And we begin to see that we exist because of these elements. And you get to a stage where you realize we're just a collection of elements pretending to be people. We're just a collection of elements pretending to be people. And this collection here, sitting here, is pretending to be Bhante Kovida from Canada. And your collection of elements is pretending to be who you think you are. But in the end, it's all pretending from that Dhamma perspective. There's emptiness. Okay, so let's begin. Just feel the hair on your head. If you have any hair left. What element is related to the hair? Is it water, earth, heat, air? It's earth, right? Earth element. Just feel the fingernails, the hardness. That's also earth, right? And for the nails and the hair to grow, the water element is involved. Now, just feel the bones in your fingers. There's the hard quality of the bones. Now feel the bones in your knees, because they're bigger bones. You have calcium, magnesium, earth element. Inside the bones you have water, you have heat. Now run your tongue over your teeth. And again, feel the hardness. Calcium, magnesium, earth element. And inside the teeth, the gums, you have water, you have heat also. And feel the wetness in the mouth. Saliva, water. Right? Now think about tears. Water element. Have you tasted your tears? What do you taste? Salt. And what element is salt? Earth element, yeah. In this case, it's not hard like bones, but it's dissolved, right? It's dissolved. Same with sweat, perspiration. Water element and of course salt, right? We go to urine or pee, which is part of our daily experience, same thing. Water, salt and other minerals. And if the urine is fresh, it feels warm. Heat element. Let's go to blood. Very interesting. Blood, of course, has water. Then you have salt, other minerals, and you have iron. So in blood, the earth element is very prominent. Then you have heat, and then you have oxygen, carbon dioxide, and nitrogen. So the air element is also prominent in blood, like the earth element. Now we have the heat element because, as we said, we are a process. Constantly changing. And of course, there's a metabolism. And this is why when we do physical activity, you can feel it, right? It's like when we did Qigong. Any kind of physical activity, the heat element rises. And if it's a lot of activity, the body will sweat as a natural way of cooling itself down. Because when we sit, we rest, the heat element cools down. And sometimes we get a fever, that's the heat element. And if the fever gets too high, we're in trouble. We need medical attention. Now just feel the back of your hand. There's water, heat, earth, and air. Also, when we breathe mindfully, we can experience the air element directly. Also, the element of space. We can feel it. As the lungs expand, contracts, the element of space. Space is an element. Of course, there's space in the body, there's space outside the body. And without space, nothing could exist. Including solar systems, galaxies, and so on. There's vast space out there. And below the skin, you have flesh, muscle, sinew, so many body parts, different liquids, and of course internal organs. The 4 elements are there. Earth, water, heat, and air. And there's space in the mouth cavity, space in the esophagus or the windpipe, space in the lungs, as we just said, space in the stomach, space in the intestines, space in the ear cavity, which allows sound vibration to take place, giving rise to hearing consciousness. And there's space in the nostrils, which allows in-breath, out-breath to take place. And when the mind is quiet, silent, then we experience spacious awareness. When the mind is quiet, silent, there is spacious awareness. Because awareness by nature is spacious. It's open. Whereas we're always thinking, the mind is always preoccupied, with mental activity, mental formation, there is no space. For example, it's because of space or awareness that we're able to experience the space in this room, as an example. And if you go outside, of course, there's vaster space. But the mind has to be quiet. And if you ever have that wonderful experience of lying under the night stars and seeing the Milky Way galaxy, the mind can actually expand out into vast space. How many of you have seen the Milky Way galaxy? And it helps to lie down, otherwise you strain your neck. And what is interesting, when you first see the Milky Way galaxy, it seems like a 2-dimensional object. But when you relax your mind, the mind becomes more spacious. you begin to experience a three-dimensional reality of the galaxy. And you begin to feel that you're really inside this vast system of countless stars. That's what we call cosmic consciousness. Cosmic consciousness. You experience it as a reality. But you have to be there. You have to lie down and expand your mind. And as you know, you have to be in a place that's far away from light pollution. This is why you could never see the Milky Way in Singapore. And speaking of space, by human scale, human size, the solar system is very, very vast. The solar system by human scale. And yet it is just a speck of dust. A speck of dust inside the Milky Way galaxy. Just to give you an idea how vast the Milky Way galaxy is. And the sun is only one star of millions. One star of millions. And to further boggle the mind, there are countless galaxies. But we don't have to go too far. Otherwise, our minds might explode. Now, the distance between the center and say Orchard Road, there is space. And there's greater space between, say, this building and say JB. Even vaster space between Singapore and say KL. And vaster space between Singapore and say Bangkok. And even vaster space between Singapore and say Jakarta. And there's even greater space between planet Earth and the Sun. And planet Earth and the other planets in the solar system. And there's even greater space between the Sun and just the closest stars. Just the closest stars in the galaxy. And there's immense, immense space between the Milky Way galaxy and just the closest neighboring galaxies. Now, when these elements come together to form a human body, when these elements come together to form a human body, we say it is male or female. And we give it names so we can identify each other more easily. Because this is our human convention, human tradition. But when we investigate, we look a bit deeper, you see there's no permanent self or center of experience. There's only body-mind process, physical and mental phenomena. Only earth, water, heat, air, and space. When we investigate deeper, we see there's no permanent self to be found. Only body-mind process, physical and mental phenomena. Only earth, water, heat, air, and space. And now we come to the sixth element. The sixth element is consciousness. And consciousness is considered an element because without consciousness, via seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and thinking, without consciousness, we wouldn't be aware of life. Without consciousness, we wouldn't be aware of life. And we wouldn't be aware of the other 5 elements. So there's earth, water, heat, air, space, and consciousness. So if you really want to know what continues after death, which is the million-dollar question, it's the elements. The elements return to nature because we're composed of the elements. Elements go back to nature. And on a deeper level, there are atoms. Atoms, otherwise known as cosmic energy. Because everything is composed of atoms. Everything. Including this microphone, this body-mind process, and the Buddha statue, the Buddha Rupa. Everything is composed of atoms. And you may recall the first law of science, which we learned in high school, regarding energy. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only change its form, and it can move from one place to another. Can you remember that? Or maybe you had bad teachers in high school. That's right. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. And on that deep, profound reflection, one is able to go beyond the idea of birth and death. One is able to go beyond the idea of birth and death. I'll just do a reading here. We're almost finished. The Buddha saw that births and deaths were but outward appearances and not true reality. Just as millions of waves rise and fall incessantly on the surface of the ocean, while the ocean itself is beyond birth and death. If the waves understood that they themselves were water, they would transcend birth and death and arrive at true inner peace, overcoming all fear and anxiety and the illusion of separation and duality. This realization enabled Siddhartha Gautama to transcend the net of birth and death. When we learn to calm our minds in order to look deeply at the true nature of things, we can arrive at full understanding which dissolves every sorrow and anxiety and gives rise to acceptance and love, loving kindness and compassion. Without understanding, there can be no love. Each person's disposition is a result of physical, emotional, and social conditions. Understanding is the key to liberation. In order to attain clear understanding, it is necessary to live mindfully, making direct contact with life in the present moment, truly seeing what is taking place within and without of oneself. Practice in mindfulness strengthens the ability to look deeply and reflect on the nature of things. And one of the illusions that we all have is the illusion of duality and separation. The duality of subject and object. And language is very misleading. For example, we tend to say, I came into this world. We came into this world. Just look at that statement a little closer. I came into this world, we came into this world. It gives the illusion that we came from somewhere else. We came from another solar system. And we landed here and we're aliens. We're outsiders. We're tourists. The illusion of separation. Just the language we use. I came into the world, we came into the world. Some idea of separation. But in truth, we didn't come into the world as outsiders, as aliens, but rather we came out of the world. We came out of the world like leaves from trees, like flowers and fruits from trees, like waves from the surface of the ocean. Do you see the difference? In other words, we're truly earthlings, in the meaning of that word, earthlings. Just like seedlings, we're earthlings. And we're composed of the elements, the energy of the planet and the solar system. We're aspects of the planet like all other life forms in this temporary physical form, being aware of itself. We're aspects of the planet composed of the energy and elements in this temporary physical form, being aware of itself. On a more cosmic scale, we're aspects of the universe in this temporary physical form, being aware of itself. And if we have 5 more minutes, we can just quickly speak about these atoms. You know, every day we take in new atoms and we expel atoms, don't we? Every day. Well, what is interesting is that all these atoms that are in our bodies right now, this present moment, they have been recycled many, many times. That's right. They have been recycled many, many times. In other life forms, of course in water, plant, minerals, and so on. And some of these atoms in our bodies were once in the sky, as clouds, clouds, rain, water vapor. Think of dinosaurs. Some of these atoms in our bodies were once in the bodies of dinosaurs. And prehistoric, fish, birds, and so on. It's quite amazing. And then one more intriguing factor, it's possible that there's one atom in our bodies at this moment that was in the body of someone very well known long, long ago. There's one atom in our body, very possibly, was once in the body of someone very well known long, long ago. For example, think of the Genghis Khan, Genghis Khan of the Mongols. It's possible. Think of Julius Caesar, from the Roman Empire. Think of Jesus. Maybe one atom was once in the body of Jesus. And yes, it's possible that there's one atom that was once in the physical form of the Buddha. It's very possible. But it doesn't mean that we're enlightened, okay? So we can end here. Very profound. But at the same time, it's very wonderful, and it's also very liberating.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
I wish you all a pleasant good night.
No time for questions. Thank you.